elderly Luna escaped the asylum to reclaim her abandoned estate. After 30 years, what she discovered. The autumn wind carried the scent of decay through the iron gates of Willowbrook Psychiatric Hospital, a place that had held Luna Whitmore captive for 3 decades. At 72 years old, her hands trembled not from age, but from determination as she slipped through the service entrance during the night shift change. The security guard, a young man named Marcus who had always treated her with unexpected kindness, had left the door unlocked. Whether by accident or design, Luna would never know. Her thin frame moved with surprising agility through the shadows of the hospital grounds. The medication they had forced upon her for years had dulled her senses, but she had been secretly hiding the pills under her tongue for months, spitting them out when the nurses weren't watching. Clarity had returned slowly, painfully, like blood rushing back to a numb limb. And with clarity came the memories of what had been stolen from her. The Whitmore estate sat 20 miles outside of Richmond, Virginia, a sprawling property that had been in her family since before the Civil War. Luna remembered the grand oak trees lining the driveway, the rose garden her mother had tended with such devotion, and the library where her father had taught her to read before she was 4 years old. But most of all, she remembered the last day she had seen it, the day her cousin Edward had arrived with 2 orderlies and a doctor who declared her mentally unfit. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. "You're seeing things that aren't there, Luna," Edward had said, his voice dripping with false concern as he stood in the grand foyer she had known since childhood. "You need help, professional help." She had fought them with every ounce of strength in her 42-year-old body, screaming that she was perfectly sane, that Edward was lying, that he wanted the estate for himself. Her fingernails had left scratches on the orderlies' arms as they grabbed her. She kicked and bit like a wild animal, but they were stronger, and the doctor had a syringe ready. The needle's prick was sharp, and within minutes, the world became fuzzy and distant. "No, no, please," she had begged as they dragged her toward the waiting ambulance. "This is my home. You can't do this. Someone help me." But the staff, people she had known for years, who had served her family faithfully, looked away. Edward had prepared them well, she realized later. He had spent months planting seeds of doubt, telling them that Luna had been acting strangely, talking to herself, making wild accusations. By the time he made his move, everyone was prepared to believe she had lost her mind. The last thing she saw as the ambulance doors closed was Edward standing on the front steps of the estate, his face a mask of theatrical concern. But his eyes held triumph. And she knew, with devastating clarity, that she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had trusted, someone who had grown up playing in these same halls, eating at the same table, calling her cousin with apparent affection. The year was 1995, and despite progress in many areas, a woman's word still carried less weight than a man's, especially when that man brought medical professionals to confirm his story. The psychiatrist who examined her at Willowbrook had spent exactly 45 minutes with her before confirming Edward's diagnosis. Luna had tried to explain, tried to be calm and rational, but every word she spoke was twisted into evidence of her illness. "Your cousin says you've been claiming he's trying to steal from you," the doctor said, making notes on his clipboard. "That sounds like paranoid delusion to me." "It's not paranoia if it's true," Luna had shouted, and the doctor had simply nodded, adding agitation and hostility to his notes. Now, 30 years later, as Luna walked along the dark highway toward her stolen home, her hospital slippers wearing thin against the asphalt, she thought about all the years she had lost. Birthdays spent in a sterile room, Christmases marked only by slightly better food in the cafeteria, the slow death of hope as year after year passed with no rescue, no vindication, no one believing her story. She had tried to be a model patient at first, thinking that if she just remained calm and reasonable, someone would see the truth. But Willowbrook wasn't interested in truth. It was a warehouse for inconvenient people, and she was just another inventory item. The staff rotated through, underpaid and overworked, too exhausted to question the files that labeled her as delusional and dangerous. A truck driver named Sam picked her up around midnight. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes that reminded Luna of her father, who had died when she was 35, 7 years before Edward's betrayal. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, taking in her hospital gown beneath a stolen coat. "You look like you've had a rough night." Luna considered lying, but decided on a version of the truth. "I'm trying to get home. I've been away for a very long time." Sam didn't press for details, which Luna appreciated. Instead, he talked about his own life, his daughter in college studying engineering, his wife who made the best peach cobbler in 3 counties, his aging mother who still insisted on living alone despite his concerns. Normal life, ordinary problems. Luna drank in every word like someone dying of thirst. He shared his coffee with her, strong and black, and the caffeine helped sharpen her thoughts. He also gave her a sandwich from his cooler, turkey and cheese on wheat bread, and Luna ate slowly, savoring flavors that weren't institutional food. When he drove 15 miles out of his way to drop her at the edge of Henrico County, where the Whitmore estate resided, she felt tears prick her eyes. "Whatever you're running from, or running to," Sam said, as she climbed down from the truck, pressing a $20 bill into her hand. "I hope you find what you're looking for. And ma'am, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is go home." The gates of the Whitmore estate appeared before her like a vision from another lifetime. Luna stood there for a long moment, her hand resting on the rusted iron, remembering how these gates had once gleamed, how they had opened smoothly to admit carriages and later automobiles, how she had swung on them as a child despite her mother's scolding. They were rusted now, hanging crooked on their hinges, and the lock had long since broken away. Vandals had spray-painted crude symbols on them, and one gate had been knocked partially off its mounting. Luna pushed through, and the metal groaned in protest, a sound like pain. The driveway was barely visible beneath overgrown weeds and volunteer saplings. The oak trees her great-grandfather had planted still stood, but they were wild and unkempt, their branches reaching across the drive to form a tunnel of shadows. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and in that gentle light, she saw her home. Luna's breath caught in her throat. The estate stood like a ghost of its former glory, and the sight of it nearly brought her to her knees. The white paint had peeled away in great sheets, revealing gray, weathered wood beneath. Several windows were broken, their glass scattered on the ground like fallen stars. Ivy had claimed the entire east wall, creeping up to the roof and pulling at the gutters. The rose garden where her mother had spent countless hours was a tangle of wild growth, the original plants strangled by weeds and brambles. The fountain in the circular drive, a beautiful piece imported from Italy by her grandfather, had cracked down the middle. Its basin was filled with stagnant water, dead leaves, and what appeared to be the skeleton of a small animal. The bronze statue of a nymph that had once graced its center was gone, probably stolen by scavengers years ago. But despite everything, despite the decay and abandonment, it was still standing. Still the Whitmore estate. Still hers. Luna approached the front door with trembling hands, each step bringing a flood of memories. Here was where she had posed for photographs on her 10th birthday. There was the window of the parlor where she had sat with her mother, learning to embroider. That corner was where the Christmas tree had always stood, so tall it nearly touched the ceiling. To her surprise, the front door swung open at her touch. The lock had been broken, probably by vandals or squatters over the years. The hinges shrieked, a sound that seemed to echo through the empty halls beyond. Luna stepped inside, and the smell of mildew and rot assaulted her senses, making her gag. The grand foyer, once gleaming with polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, was now a ruin that broke her heart. The chandelier had fallen at some point, and its remains lay scattered across the floor. Crystals, brass fittings, and broken chains spread across the marble like the aftermath of a battle. Water stains marked the ceiling in ugly brown patterns, and animal droppings suggested that raccoons, possums, or other creatures had made this place their home. The marble floor was cracked in several places, and someone had spray-painted obscenities on the walls. Luna traced her fingers over the graffiti, feeling rage and sorrow in equal measure. This had been a place of beauty, of culture, of family history stretching back generations. And it had been reduced to this. She moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, touching the peeling wallpaper that her mother had chosen so carefully, the broken furniture that had been in the family for over a century, the portrait of her parents that hung crooked on the dining room wall. The portrait's canvas had been slashed, probably by the same vandals who had spray-painted the walls, but her parents' faces were still visible, still watching over the wreckage of their legacy. "I'm so sorry," Luna whispered to the portrait. "I tried to protect it. I tried to come back." In the library, books had been scattered everywhere, their pages bloated and moldy from water damage. This room had been her father's pride and joy. He had collected rare books, first editions, volumes of poetry and philosophy and history. Luna knelt among the ruins, picking up what had once been a first edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The pages crumbled at her touch, beyond saving. She found her father's favorite chair collapsed in on itself, the leather rotted away, springs bursting through the padding. He had sat in that chair every evening, reading aloud to her and her mother, his deep voice bringing stories to life. Now it was just garbage, fit only for disposal. The kitchen was worse. Cabinets hung open, their contents long since looted or destroyed. Dishes lay shattered on the floor, including pieces of her grandmother's china. Delicate porcelain painted with roses that had survived the Civil War, only to be destroyed by neglect and vandalism. Something had died in the corner, leaving only bones and a terrible smell that made Luna back out of the room, covering her mouth. As she climbed the stairs to the second floor, each step creaking ominously beneath her weight, Luna tried to prepare herself for what she would find. The bedrooms would be ransacked, she knew. The bathrooms would be destroyed. Everything of value would be gone. Everything beautiful would be ruined. But she wasn't prepared for the sound she heard as she reached the top of the stairs. Voices, coming from her father's old study at the end of the hall. Real voices, not memories. Someone was in her house. Her first instinct was to run, to flee back down the stairs and out into the morning. 30 years in Willowbrook had taught her to avoid confrontation, to make herself small and quiet, to never draw attention. But 30 years of captivity had also taught her that running solved nothing. She had run from Edward's accusations, had tried to flee from the orderlies, had attempted to escape from Willowbrook multiple times in those first terrible years. Running had never worked. So instead, Luna moved quietly down the hall, her hospital slippers silent on the rotted carpet. The study door was ajar, and through the gap, she could see two figures, a man and a woman, both young, perhaps in their 30s, dressed in jeans and jackets, and holding flashlights that cut through the dusty gloom. "I'm telling you, Sarah, there's something here," the man said, his voice excited, almost manic. "My grandmother always said the Whitmore family had money hidden somewhere on this property. Old families like this, they didn't trust banks, especially not after the Depression. They hid cash, gold, jewelry, all kinds of valuables. Edward Whitmore spent years looking for it before he died." Sarah laughed, a skeptical sound that reminded Luna of her own mother's practical nature. "Your grandmother also said she saw Bigfoot behind the Piggly Wiggly Tom, and that Elvis came through her checkout line at the grocery store in 1989. Maybe we should take her stories with a grain of salt." "Edward died broke," Tom insisted, and Luna could hear him moving around the room, probably tapping on walls looking for hollow spaces. Completely bankrupt, he was living in a trailer park for God's sake. A man who inherited this entire estate ended up with nothing. He told people before he died that Luna had hidden the family fortune somewhere, that he had searched for years but could never find it. He spent everything he had searching this place, trying to tear down walls and dig up the grounds. That's why it looks like this. He destroyed it looking for money that was probably never hidden in the first place. Luna felt something cold settle in her stomach, spreading through her chest like ice water. Edward had destroyed her home. Not vandals, not time, not weather, Edward. He had torn apart the estate looking for money that didn't exist, driven by the same greed that had led him to steal everything from her in the first place. The Whitmore fortune had been in land and investments, stocks and bonds, all properly managed by lawyers and accountants. There was no hidden treasure, no cache of gold buried in the garden or cash stuffed in the walls. Everything had been legal and documented and accessible. To Edward, once he had Luna declared incompetent and gained control of her assets. If he had died broke, it meant he had squandered it all. Every penny her father had carefully saved, every investment her grandfather had wisely made, every piece of the financial legacy built over generations. Edward had spent it all, probably searching frantically for more, never satisfied, always believing there must be something he had missed. He was paranoid, Sarah said, and Luna could hear her moving toward the door. Probably felt guilty for what he did to his cousin, having her committed like that. Guilt can make people crazy. My grandmother said Luna really was crazy, though, Tom replied. She was seeing things, talking to walls, making wild accusations against Edward. The whole family agreed she needed to be in Willowbrook. Luna felt rage surge through her, hot and fierce, burning away 30 years of institutional compliance and forced docility. The whole family had agreed. They had all believed Edward's lies, or pretended to believe them because it was easier than standing up to him. And now strangers were in her house, discussing her supposed madness as if it were established fact, while they searched for treasure that had never existed. She pushed the door open fully, and both intruders jumped. Sarah let out a small scream, dropping her flashlight, and Tom stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of old papers. "This is private property," Luna said, her voice steady despite her fear, despite her rage. "You're trespassing." Tom recovered first, his initial shock giving way to suspicion and hostility. "Lady, this place has been abandoned for 20 years. Nobody owns it anymore. The county's probably going to tear it down next year to put in a strip mall or something. We're not hurting anyone." "I own it," Luna said firmly, drawing herself up to her full height, channeling the dignity her mother had always insisted upon. "I am Luna Whitmore, and this is my family's estate. You are trespassing, and I want you to leave immediately." Sarah and Tom exchanged glances, and Luna could see the disbelief on their faces. She must have looked like a madwoman, an elderly woman in a hospital gown and stolen coat, appearing in an abandoned mansion at dawn, claiming ownership of a property everyone believed belonged to no one. "Luna Whitmore died in a mental hospital," Sarah said slowly, as if speaking to a child or someone who couldn't understand simple facts. "Everyone knows that. It was in the newspapers when they closed Willowbrook last month. They listed all the patients who died there over the years, and her name was on the list. Edward Whitmore's crazy cousin who thought the walls were talking to her, who accused her own family of conspiracy, who spent 30 years locked up because she was a danger to herself and others. The casual cruelty of the word stung worse than any punishment Luna had endured in Willowbrook. To be dismissed so easily, to have her entire life reduced to a few lines of misinformation in a newspaper article about a hospital closing. She had been declared dead without dying, erased from existence by bureaucratic error or deliberate fraud. But she had heard worse in Willowbrook. She had been called crazy, delusional, dangerous, and violent. She had been told she would never leave, never be believed, never be anything more than patient number 4782 in Ward C. And yet here she stood, in her family's home, very much alive and very much sane. "I did not die," Luna said, her voice gaining strength. I escaped from Willowbrook 3 days ago. I walked out during the night shift change, and I have been making my way back here ever since. And the walls never talked to me. That was Edward's lie to steal my inheritance, to take this estate that should have been mine, to rob me of 30 years of my life." She paused, studying their faces, seeing the uncertainty creeping into their expressions. "You said Edward died broke. When?" Tom seemed caught between suspicion and curiosity, his treasure-hunting enthusiasm warring with his discomfort at confronting someone who might actually have a legitimate claim to the property. 5 years ago, maybe 6. He was living in a trailer park on the south side of Richmond, drinking himself to death on cheap vodka. My grandmother visited him once before he died. They were second cousins or something. She knew him when they were kids. She said he was rambling, going on and on about the Whitmore fortune, how Luna had hidden it somewhere, how he had torn the whole estate apart looking for it but never found it. He kept saying he deserved it, that he had sacrificed everything to search for it, that it wasn't fair that Luna got to keep the secret even after she was locked away. Luna closed her eyes, feeling a complicated mix of satisfaction, sorrow, and something that might have been pity. Edward had destroyed himself chasing money that was never hidden, money that he had already stolen and wasted. The estate had been collateral damage in his paranoid obsession, torn apart by someone who couldn't accept that he had already gotten everything and thrown it away through his own greed and incompetence. "There is no hidden fortune," she said quietly, opening her eyes to meet their stares. The Whitmore money was in stocks, bonds, property deeds, investment accounts, all things that were properly documented and legally managed. Edward had access to all of it after I was institutionalized. The court gave him control of my assets when they declared me incompetent. If he died broke, it's because he spent it all, probably on his obsessive search for treasure that never existed. She moved to the window, looking out at the overgrown grounds. In the growing daylight, she could see more damage. Collapsed outbuildings, a greenhouse with all its glass shattered, great holes dug in what had once been the carefully manicured lawn. The gardens were destroyed, the pathways disappeared beneath weeds. The ornamental pond was nothing but a muddy depression. "He really tore this place apart, didn't he?" she murmured, pressing her forehead against the dirty glass. "He destroyed everything our family built, everything my parents loved, searching for something that was never there. And for what? What did he gain? A few years of spending money he was too paranoid to enjoy, followed by poverty and alcoholism, and death alone in a trailer park." Sarah approached cautiously, her earlier fear giving way to something that might have been sympathy. "If you really are Luna Whitmore, can you prove it? I'm not trying to be difficult, but you have to understand how this looks. You show up here dressed in hospital clothes, claiming to be someone who's supposed to be dead, asking us to believe a story that sounds like the delusions of a crazy woman." Luna finished for her, a bitter smile crossing her face. "Yes, I understand exactly how it sounds. That's been my life for 30 years, trying to tell the truth and having everyone assume I'm lying or delusional." She thought for a moment, then remembered something. In the library downstairs, on the third shelf from the top on the east wall, there's a copy of Jane Eyre with a green leather cover. It was my favorite book as a child. Inside the front cover, I wrote my name when I was 7 years old. The inscription reads, "Luna Marie Whitmore, April 15th, 1960. This book belongs to me, and no one else may read it without permission." I was a very possessive child. She smiled slightly at the memory. My mother scolded me for writing in books, but my father said it was all right, that books should be loved and personalized, that a library full of pristine, unread volumes was a tragedy. The book should still be there. Edward wouldn't have looked at the children's books, and it wasn't valuable enough for thieves to bother with. Tom and Sarah went downstairs, and Luna heard them moving around in the library, books being shifted and dropped. Several minutes passed, and Luna stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint her destroyed estate in shades of gold and pink. It had been beautiful once. It could be beautiful again, if she could find the strength and resources to restore it. When Tom and Sarah returned, Sarah was holding a water-damaged book with a green cover. The leather was mildewed and peeling, and the pages were swollen from moisture, but it was intact. She opened it carefully, and there, in a child's careful handwriting, slightly faded but still legible, was exactly what Luna had described. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, staring at the inscription, then at Luna, then back at the book. "You really are her. You're really Luna Whitmore." Tom moved closer, reading over Sarah's shoulder. "This doesn't make sense. If you're alive, why does everyone think you're dead? Why were you listed in that newspaper article about Willowbrook?" Luna sank down onto the dusty floor, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through her escape, through the long walk, through this confrontation was fading, leaving her weak and shaky. Bureaucratic error, probably, or deliberate fraud, who knows. Willowbrook was corrupt from top to bottom. They falsified records, lost patients, covered up abuse and deaths. When they finally closed it down last month, the investigators found dozens of discrepancies in the files. Some patients who were supposed to be there were missing. Some patients who had supposedly been released were still locked up. And apparently, at least one patient who was very much alive was declared dead. She looked up at them, these strangers who had come looking for treasure, and found instead a ghost. "I need to prove I'm alive. I need to prove I'm sane. I need to reclaim my legal rights and my property, and I have no idea where to start." Over the next few hours, the three of them sat in the least damaged room, an old sitting room on the first floor where the roof was still mostly intact and the smell wasn't too overwhelming. Luna told her story in detail, from Edward's betrayal to her years in Willowbrook, from her careful planning to her escape. Tom and Sarah listened with growing horror and sympathy, occasionally asking questions, sometimes just sitting in stunned silence. "That's not just medical malpractice," Tom said when she finished. "That's kidnapping, fraud, maybe even attempted murder. You could sue the hospital, Edward's estate, everyone involved." "Everyone involved is probably dead or protected by statutes of limitations," Luna said wearily. "And I don't want revenge. I just want my life back. I want my home back. I want to be legally alive again." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "My sister works for a law firm in Richmond, Chen & Associates. They do civil rights cases and they take on pro bono work sometimes, especially for cases like this. Let me call her. If anyone can help you navigate this legal nightmare, it's Jennifer." While Sarah made the call, stepping outside to get better reception, Tom went to his car and returned with bottles of water and a bag of fast food breakfast sandwiches. "We stopped at McDonald's on the way here," he said sheepishly. "We were planning to spend the day treasure hunting. I packed extra food." Luna accepted a sandwich gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten since dinner the previous night at Willowbrook, a meal of overcooked chicken, instant mashed potatoes, and canned green beans that all tasted vaguely of cardboard and despair. The fast food sandwich was greasy and probably terrible for her, but it tasted like freedom. As she ate, she looked around the ruined sitting room and felt the weight of what lay ahead. The estate was barely standing, her fortune was gone, and she was a 72-year-old woman who had been legally declared dead and mentally incompetent. The obstacles seemed insurmountable, like a mountain too tall to climb, like a battle already lost before it began. But she had survived 30 years in Willowbrook. She had kept her sanity when everything around her insisted she had none. She had planned and executed an escape from a locked facility. She had walked through the night to get here. Surely she could find a way to rebuild, to reclaim, to start again. Sarah returned, her expression hopeful. "Jennifer's on her way. She's bringing another lawyer from her firm, someone who specializes in estate law. They want to hear your story in person. And they think they can help. It's going to be a fight, Luna, but Jennifer says if your story checks out, you have a solid case. Jennifer Chen arrived 3 hours later with her colleague, Robert Martinez. They were both young, Jennifer in her early 30s, Robert perhaps 40, sharp-eyed and professional, carrying briefcases and tablets and an air of competence that made Luna want to cry with relief. These were people who knew how to navigate systems, how to fight bureaucracies, how to turn injustice into legal action. They sat at what remained of the dining room table. Tom had cleared away the debris and found chairs that were still relatively stable, and listened to Luna's story with careful attention. Jennifer took notes on her tablet, while Robert asked questions, probing for details, clarifying timeline, building a case even as Luna spoke. "This is going to be complicated," Jennifer said finally, when Luna had finished and answered all their questions. "You were declared legally incompetent in 1995, and based on what you're telling us, there's probably a death certificate filed somewhere in the system. We'll need to prove your identity conclusively, which means DNA testing against any living relatives you might have. Do you have any family left?" Luna shook her head. "I was an only child. Both my parents are dead. Edward was my closest living relative, and he's gone now too. There might be distant cousins, but I wouldn't know where to find them." "We can work with DNA databases," Robert said, making notes. "We can also get dental records from Willowbrook, assuming they kept proper records, which is questionable, and compare them to any dental records from before your commitment. We'll need to overturn the competency ruling, which will require extensive psychological evaluation, and we'll need to establish your right to whatever remains of the estate, which means untangling whatever Edward did with the property before he died. It could take months," Jennifer added gently. "Maybe years. The legal system moves slowly, especially for cases this complex. And I have to be honest with you, Luna. You're going to face a lot of skepticism. A lot of people are going to doubt your story, question your sanity, assume you're trying to pull some kind of scam. It's not going to be easy." "I have time," Luna said simply, folding her hands in her lap with a calmness she didn't entirely feel. "I've already lost 30 years. What's a few more if it means getting my life back? And I've faced skepticism before. I've been called a liar and a lunatic for 3 decades. I can handle more of the same if it leads to justice." The lawyers agreed to take her case pro bono, moved by her story and the obvious injustice of what had been done to her. They also had practical concerns. If they could prove Luna's case, it could lead to lawsuits against Willowbrook's parent corporation, against the estate of the doctor who had signed her commitment papers, possibly against the county for failing to properly oversee her case. There was potential for significant damages, which meant potential for significant legal fees once the case was won. But more than the money, Jennifer explained, cases like Luna's were exactly why she had gone to law school. "My grandmother was a civil rights attorney in the 60s, she said as they prepared to leave. "She always told me that the law should protect the powerless from the powerful. That's what I'm going to do for you, Luna. We're going to prove that you were powerless, that powerful people abused you, and that the law failed to protect you. And then we're going to make it right." They arranged for Luna to stay temporarily with Sarah, who lived alone in a small house in Richmond, and offered her spare room without hesitation. "I can't pay you," Luna warned, as they drove back to the city in Sarah's aging Honda, the morning sun now high in the sky. "I don't have any money. I don't even have identification or a social security card. I'm essentially a non-person." "I'm not asking you to pay me," Sarah replied, her eyes on the road. "What happened to you was wrong. If I can help make it right, that's payment enough. Besides, I have a spare room that's just collecting dust and boxes of stuff I should have donated years ago. You'll actually be doing me a favor by forcing me to clean it out." Sarah's house was small, but clean and comfortable. A modest 2-bedroom bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. She cleared out the spare room that afternoon, moving boxes to the garage, setting up the bed with fresh sheets, finding towels and toiletries for Luna to use. It was more kindness than Luna had experienced in 3 decades, and she found herself crying as she took her first real shower, washing away the institutional smell of Willowbrook, standing under hot water for as long as she wanted without a nurse banging on the door telling her time was up. Sarah lent her clothes, jeans and sweatshirts that were too big, but infinitely better than a hospital gown. She cooked dinner for them both, simple pasta with sauce from a jar, and they ate at a small kitchen table like normal people, like friends, like 2 women sharing a meal instead of patient and caretaker. "Why are you helping me?" Luna asked as they washed dishes together afterward. "You barely know me. This isn't your problem. You could have just left the estate when I told you to, gone on with your life, forgotten all about the crazy old lady claiming to be a dead woman." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, carefully drying a plate. "My grandmother had dementia," she finally said. "Early onset, diagnosed when she was only 62. She was still pretty functional for a while, still living on her own, managing her finances, taking care of herself. But my uncle, my mom's brother, he convinced her that she couldn't handle things anymore. He got power of attorney, moved her into his house supposedly to take care of her, and then systematically cleaned out her bank accounts." She set the plate down, her hands shaking slightly. "He spent her retirement savings on a boat. A fucking boat. Meanwhile, Grandma was sharing a bedroom with his kids, confused about where she was, asking for her house, asking where her money went. My mom tried to fight it legally, got a lawyer, filed complaints. But by the time the courts got involved, the money was gone, and Grandma had deteriorated to the point where she couldn't testify on her own behalf. She died in a nursing home 2 years later, broke and confused and probably wondering why her family had abandoned her." Sarah turned to face Luna, tears in her eyes. "We never got justice for her. My uncle faced no consequences. He still has that boat. He still lives in his nice house bought with money that should have paid for Grandma's care. And I've felt guilty about it ever since, like I should have done more, fought harder, found some way to help her." She reached out and took Luna's hand. "I can't fix what happened to my grandmother. But maybe I can help you. Maybe I can be the person for you that I wish I had been for her. That means something. That matters." Luna squeezed her hand, too moved to speak for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother was lucky to have you love her. Even if you couldn't save her, you cared enough to try. That's not nothing." The legal battle that followed was indeed long and complicated, a marathon of paperwork, court appearances, evaluations, and bureaucratic obstacles. Jennifer and Robert worked tirelessly, filing motions, gathering evidence, building Luna's case piece by piece. DNA testing proved difficult without living relatives, but they found another way. Robert discovered that Luna had donated blood to the Red Cross regularly before her commitment. She had been trying to reach 100 donations, her father's goal that he had never quite achieved. The Red Cross still had records of her blood type and other markers, combined with dental records from Willowbrook, which were, surprisingly, accurate, and a comparison to dental x-rays from before 1995 that Jennifer tracked down through Luna's former dentist's archived files. They built a solid case for her identity. The psychological evaluations were harder. Luna submitted to hours of testing with multiple psychiatrists, answering the same questions over and over, proving her sanity to people who had already read Edward's lies in her file and were predisposed to doubt her. Some of the doctors were skeptical, clearly suspicious that she was faking wellness, that the real Luna would emerge under pressure. But the psychiatrist who finally wrote the definitive evaluation report was a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, a clinical psychologist in her 60s with steel-gray hair, sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Luna of her mother. Dr. Morrison spent 5 sessions with Luna, each lasting several hours. She didn't just ask the standard diagnostic questions. She wanted to know about Luna's childhood, her education, her life before Willowbrook, her memories of the commitment, her years in the hospital, her escape, her plans for the future. She administered cognitive tests, personality assessments, trauma screenings, and memory evaluations. "You show no signs of mental illness, Ms. Whitmore," Dr. Morrison said after their 5th session, setting down her pen and looking Luna directly in the eye. "In fact, you show remarkable resilience, emotional intelligence, and clarity of thought given what you've endured. The diagnosis that led to your commitment was either grossly incompetent or deliberately false. Based on everything I've observed, tested, and documented, I would say it was the latter." "Deliberately false," Luna echoed. "You mean you think Edward paid that doctor to lie?" "I can't prove that," Dr. Morrison said carefully. "The doctor in question, Dr. Harold Simmons, died in 2003. But I reviewed the original commitment evaluation, and it's a travesty of psychiatric practice. He spent 45 minutes with you and diagnosed you with paranoid delusions, despite the fact that your delusions were verifiable concerns about financial impropriety. He noted that you were agitated and hostile, but failed to note that you were being forcibly removed from your home against your will. Of course, you were agitated." Dr. Morrison pulled out a thick file. "I also did some research into Dr. Simmons' career. In the 10 years before your commitment, he signed commitment papers for 47 patients. That's unusually high for a private practice psychiatrist. And in at least 12 of those cases, the patients' families gained significant financial benefit from the commitment. Several of those families were later investigated for fraud, though nothing was ever proven. Dr. Simmons had a reputation in certain circles as someone who would sign the papers if the price was right." Luna felt her hands clenching into fists. "So he sold me. Edward paid him to declare me insane, and he did it, and I lost 30 years of my life because of it." "I believe that's exactly what happened," Dr. Morrison said, her voice gentle but firm. "And my report is going to state clearly that you are competent, that you should never have been institutionalized, and that what was done to you constitutes a gross violation of your civil rights and medical ethics. It won't undo the harm, but it should help you reclaim your legal status." Armed with Dr. Morrison's report and other evidence, Jennifer and Robert filed motions to restore Luna's legal rights. The process was slow, grinding through the court system with agonizing delays. There were hearings where Luna had to testify, recounting her story to judges and lawyers and court-appointed advocates. There were challenges from the county, which questioned whether this elderly woman was really Luna Whitmore or an imposter trying to claim an abandoned property. But gradually, the weight of evidence became overwhelming. The DNA markers matched, the dental records matched. The memories Luna described were verified through historical documents, photographs, and testimony from a few elderly residents who remembered the Whitmore family. Dr. Morrison's evaluation was unassailable, and Robert found 2 other patients from Willowbrook who had been committed under suspicious circumstances and were willing to testify about the hospital's corrupt practices. 10 months after Luna's escape from Willowbrook, a judge ruled that the 1995 competency hearing had been conducted improperly, with insufficient evidence, questionable medical testimony, and failure to provide Luna with adequate legal representation. Her rights were restored, and she was legally recognized as alive, competent, and the rightful owner of the Whitmore estate, or what remained of it. The estate itself, however, presented a different set of problems. Edward had taken out loans against the property before his death, using it as collateral for his obsessive search for hidden treasure. When he defaulted on those loans, the liens had transferred to the county. The Whitmore estate technically belonged to Luna, but it came with over $200,000 in liens, back taxes, and penalties. "You have options," Robert explained during a meeting at his office, spreading out financial documents across the conference table. "You could declare bankruptcy, walk away from the debt, and start fresh somewhere else with whatever money you can get from settlements and lawsuits. It's not a bad option, honestly. You'd be free of the financial burden, and you could have a comfortable retirement." "Or?" Luna asked, because she could hear the hesitation in his voice. Or you fight to keep the estate, which means finding a way to pay off the debts and somehow generate income from a property that's barely standing. It won't be easy. It probably won't even be possible. But if you want to keep your family's legacy, that's the only way. Luna thought about walking away, about starting fresh in a small apartment somewhere, living out her remaining years in peace and comfort. It was tempting. God, it was tempting. She was 73 years old. She had already fought so hard for so long. Didn't she deserve rest? But then she thought about the library, about her father reading to her from his favorite chair. She thought about her mother's rose garden, about learning to identify plants and prune properly. She thought about Christmas mornings in the grand foyer, about birthday parties in the garden, about Sunday dinners in the dining room with sunlight streaming through the windows. The Whitmore estate wasn't just a building. It was the last physical connection to her parents, to her childhood, to the person she had been before Edward's betrayal. If she walked away, Edward would have won. He would have successfully erased the Whitmore legacy, destroyed their history, turned their home into nothing but a memory. "I want to keep it," Luna said firmly. "I don't know how, but I want to try. That estate is all I have left of my family. I'm not letting it go without a fight." Jennifer and Robert exchanged glances, and Luna saw a mix of concern and admiration in their faces. They thought she was being foolish, probably. They thought she was setting herself up for failure and heartbreak. But they were also lawyers who believed in fighting for justice even when the odds were bad. "Okay," Jennifer said. "Then let's figure out how to make this work." The first step was finding assets Luna might not know about. Robert dug through decades of Whitmore family financial records, searching for anything Edward might have missed or overlooked. Most of the stocks and bonds had been cashed out years ago, the investments sold, the bank accounts drained. But Robert found one thing Edward apparently hadn't known about: a safety deposit box at a bank in Richmond, rented in Luna's mother's maiden name, with the rental fees automatically deducted from a trust account that had somehow escaped Edward's notice. Opening the box required more legal wrangling, more proof of identity, more paperwork. But finally, 3 months after Luna's rights were restored, she stood in a bank vault with Jennifer and Robert, watching as an employee opened the small metal box. Inside was her mother's jewelry collection: diamond necklaces, pearl earrings, sapphire bracelets, ruby rings, and her grandmother's engagement ring, a spectacular piece with a 5-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones. There was also a bundle of letters tied with ribbon, documents in waterproof plastic, and a note in her mother's handwriting. Luna picked up the note with trembling hands and read, "My dearest Luna, if you are reading this, then something has happened to both your father and me, and you have found this box as I intended. The jewelry in this box belonged to my mother and grandmother, and now it belongs to you. Do not feel obligated to keep it if you need to sell it. These are just things, and things matter far less than the people we love. I hope you wear some of these pieces and think of us. I hope the diamond necklace graces your throat on your wedding day. I hope you give the engagement ring to your own daughter someday. But if you need to sell them to pay for your education, or start a business, or survive a hard time, then do so without guilt. We would want you to use these resources however you need. Live well, my darling girl. Be happy. Make good choices. And remember that you are loved, always and forever. Your mother, Catherine Whitmore." Luna read the note 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before carefully folding it and putting it back in the box. Her mother had hidden this collection not from thieves, but from her father's tendency to use family assets for charitable causes. Catherine Whitmore had wanted to ensure her daughter had something of her own, something Edward couldn't have known about, because it was hidden before he started circling like a vulture. A jewelry appraiser valued the collection at approximately $170,000. Not enough to pay off all the debts and restore the estate, but enough to start. Luna made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of selling all the jewelry immediately, she sold only half of it, keeping the pieces her mother had specifically mentioned in the note. She used the money to pay off the most pressing liens and back taxes, bringing the remaining debt down to a manageable level. Then she used the remaining jewelry as collateral to approach a bank about a business loan. Jennifer went with her to the meeting, armed with business plans they had developed together. "I want to turn the estate into a bed and breakfast," Luna explained to the loan officer, a middle-aged woman named Karen Davies, who looked at Luna's age and history with obvious skepticism. Historical properties are popular with tourists, especially in Virginia, where there's so much Civil War history and colonial architecture. The Whitmore estate has significant historical value. It was built in 1847, survived the Civil War, and has been in the same family for 5 generations. With proper restoration and marketing, it could be a profitable business. Karen looked at the business plan, at Luna's age, at the photographs of the estate in its current ruined state. "Ms. Whitmore, with all due respect, you're 73 years old, you have no business management experience, and you're proposing to restore a property that would challenge someone half your age with decades of construction experience. This is a very high-risk venture." "I know," Luna said calmly, "but I'm not proposing to do it alone. I have a contractor who's committed to helping, Tom Morrison, who's been working on the property already and knows its condition intimately. I have a marketing consultant who's volunteered to create our online presence and manage bookings. His name is Sarah Chen, and she has experience in hospitality management. And I have time. I may be 73, but I'm in good health. I have decades of life ahead of me, hopefully, and I have nothing else to do but make this work." She leaned forward. "I spent 30 years in an institution, Ms. Davies. 30 years of my life were stolen from me. I've gotten some of it back, my legal rights, my identity, my sanity validated. But the one thing I haven't gotten back is my home. This loan would allow me to reclaim it, to turn it into something that generates income and honors my family's history. And I promise you, I will work harder than any borrower you've ever had, because this isn't just business for me. It's personal." Karen was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the numbers, the business plan, the collateral. Finally, she said, "I'm going to have to run this by my supervisor. But Ms. Whitmore, I have to tell you, your story is compelling and your determination is impressive. If my supervisor approves this, we'd be willing to offer you a loan of up to $100,000, secured by the jewelry collateral and a lien on the property itself. The terms won't be generous. The interest rate will be higher than standard because of the risk involved. But it would give you a chance." The supervisor did approve the loan, and Luna walked out of the bank with a check, a repayment schedule, and a fierce determination to make this work. She was 73 years old, starting a business from scratch, taking on debt and risk that most people her age would consider insane. But she had been called insane for 30 years. She might as well earn the label by doing something genuinely audacious. Tom Morrison assembled a crew of workers, some from his regular team, others who volunteered their time after hearing Luna's story, which had started circulating in local news outlets. Sarah had contacted a reporter friend, and Luna's case had become something of a local sensation. Elderly woman escapes from psychiatric hospital, reclaims family estate, fights to restore it after decades of abandonment. It was the kind of human interest story that resonated with people. Donations started coming in. Small amounts mostly, $20 here, $50 there, but they added up. People sent money with notes saying they were inspired by Luna's courage, that they hoped she succeeded, that they wanted to help restore a piece of Virginia history. Some sent supplies instead of money, paint, tools, cleaning supplies, even furniture and fixtures that might work in the restored rooms. The restoration work began with the essentials. Tom's crew repaired the roof first, stopping the water damage from getting worse. They tarped sections that couldn't be immediately fixed and replaced the most damaged areas where rot had compromised the structural integrity. It was exhausting, expensive work, but absolutely necessary. Without a sound roof, everything else would eventually deteriorate beyond saving. While the roof work progressed, Luna focused on what she could do herself. She spent her days at the estate, armed with cleaning supplies, garbage bags, and a determination that bordered on obsessive. She scrubbed floors on her hands and knees, washed windows until her arms ached, pulled weeds from the garden until her back screamed in protest. Every night, she returned to Sarah's house exhausted and filthy, her elderly body protesting the physical labor it hadn't done in decades. "You're going to kill yourself," Sarah said one evening, watching Luna limp through the door, dirt under her fingernails and sweat staining her borrowed work clothes. "You need to pace yourself. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the Whitmore estate won't be restored in one either." "I know," Luna said, collapsing onto the couch with a groan. "But every day I don't work is a day the decay continues. Every hour I rest is an hour that mold spreads, that wood rots, that the place slides further into ruin. I can't stop. I won't stop." Sarah sat beside her, handing her a glass of water. "Then at least let me help more. I've been handling the website and marketing from my laptop, but I could take vacation days, come to the estate, work alongside you. You shouldn't be doing this alone." And so, Sarah did. She took a week off from her job at a marketing firm and spent it at the estate, working beside Luna. They made an odd pair. A 73-year-old woman and a 30-something professional, both wearing work gloves and old clothes, both attacking the decay with spray bottles and mops and sheer determination. Tom's crew completed the electrical work, rewiring the entire second floor and part of the first to bring it up to code. The plumbing required even more extensive work. Many of the pipes had burst during winters when the house sat empty and unheated, and everything needed to be replaced. Tom worked long hours, often staying at the estate until dark, driven by something Luna didn't entirely understand until he explained it one evening. "My grandfather was a contractor too," he said, sitting on the front steps with Luna, both of them eating sandwiches and watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "He taught me the trade, taught me to respect old buildings, to see the craftsmanship in them. He always said that old houses have souls, that they remember the families who lived in them, that letting them decay is like letting history die." He gestured at the estate. "This place has a soul, Luna. I can feel it. And what Edward did to it, tearing it apart looking for treasure that didn't exist, that was like torture. I want to heal it. I want to give it back its dignity. Does that sound crazy?" "If it does, then we're both crazy," Luna said with a small smile. "But I don't think it's crazy to love a place, to want to save it. I think it's one of the most sane things a person can do." The work progressed slowly but steadily. 3 bedrooms on the second floor became habitable first. Tom and his crew installed new subflooring where the old had rotted, replastered walls, replaced windows, and made the rooms clean, safe, and functional. They weren't luxurious. The budget didn't allow for luxury. But they were comfortable, with fresh paint, refinished hardwood floors, and bathrooms that actually worked. Luna furnished them carefully, mixing pieces of original Whitmore furniture that could be restored with items donated by supporters or purchased secondhand. She found an antique dealer who specialized in period-appropriate pieces and was willing to sell to her at cost after hearing her story. Each room took on its own character. One decorated in blues and whites with a nautical theme, another in soft greens and yellows that caught the morning sun, a third in deep burgundies and golds that felt warm and cozy. The library became Luna's passion project. She couldn't save all her father's books. Too many had been destroyed by water, mold, and time. But she saved what she could, carefully cleaning each volume, having the most damaged ones professionally restored when possible. She built new shelves to replace those that had collapsed, painted the walls in the same deep green her father had chosen, and positioned his restored chair near the window where he used to read. Books that couldn't be saved, she replaced with similar editions purchased from estate sales and used bookstores. She wanted the library to feel as it had when her father was alive, full of leather-bound volumes, classical literature, poetry, philosophy, and history. She spent hours arranging the books, creating a space that honored her father's memory while serving a new purpose for future guests. Sarah, meanwhile, created the Whitmore Estate Inn's online presence. She built a website with historical photographs of the estate in its glory days, alongside current pictures showing the restoration progress. She wrote blog posts telling Luna's story, carefully edited to be inspiring rather than tragic, and shared them on social media. She created booking software, pricing structures, and policies for the inn. "We should have a grand opening," Sarah said one day, about 8 months into the restoration. "Make it an event. Invite local media. Show people what we've accomplished. It would generate publicity and hopefully bookings." Luna hesitated. "But we're not finished. There's still so much to do. The downstairs rooms need work. The grounds are still a mess. The outbuildings are barely standing. We'll never be completely finished," Sarah said gently. "Restoration is an ongoing process, especially with a property this size and age. But 3 bedrooms are ready. The common areas are presentable. The kitchen is functional. That's enough to open. We can continue working on other areas while guests are here." So they set a date for the grand opening, a spring evening, when the weather would be mild and the few roses Luna had managed to revive would be blooming. Sarah sent press releases to local newspapers, historical societies, and tourism boards. She created an event page on social media and was surprised by the response. Luna's story had touched people, and many wanted to see the estate's transformation for themselves. The week before the opening, Luna stood in the grand foyer, now cleaned, repaired, and repainted, and felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her down. The chandelier had been replaced with a period-appropriate fixture donated by a supporter. The marble floor gleamed, cracks repaired, and the surface polished. The walls wore fresh wallpaper in a pattern similar to the original. The staircase had been refinished, its banister smooth and solid beneath her hand. It wasn't exactly as it had been. It would never be exactly the same. But it was beautiful again. It was alive again. And it was hers. The grand opening drew a larger crowd than Luna had anticipated. Over 100 people showed up: reporters, local officials, history enthusiasts, supporters who had donated money or supplies, and curious neighbors who had watched the estate's transformation with interest. Tom's crew had set up lights in the garden, and Sarah had arranged for a local caterer to provide refreshments. Luna stood on the front steps as the sun set, looking out at all these faces. Most of them strangers, some of them friends, all of them here to celebrate what she had accomplished. Jennifer and Robert were there with their families. Dr. Patricia Morrison came, bringing her husband. Marcus, the security guard from Willowbrook, stood near the fountain Tom had repaired, looking uncomfortable in a suit but smiling genuinely. A local television reporter approached with a camera crew. "Ms. Whitmore, can you tell our viewers what this moment means to you?" Luna looked at the estate, its windows glowing warm in the twilight. She thought about the day she had first seen it after her escape, broken, abandoned, seemingly beyond saving. She thought about Edward destroying it in his paranoid search for treasure. She thought about 30 years in Willowbrook, being told she was crazy, that she would never leave, that she had no home to return to. 4 years ago, she said, her voice steady and clear. I was a prisoner in a psychiatric hospital, locked up for a crime I didn't commit, for an illness I didn't have. I had been declared legally dead, my property abandoned, my story forgotten. If you had told me then that I would be standing here today, in my family's restored home, about to open a business and start a new chapter of my life at 77 years old, I wouldn't have believed you. She paused, feeling tears prick her eyes, but refusing to let them fall. This estate represents more than just a building to me. It represents justice delayed but not denied. It represents the truth finally being acknowledged after decades of lies. It represents the fact that it's never too late to start over, to reclaim what was stolen, to build something meaningful from ruins. Some people have asked me why I didn't just take the money from my legal settlements and live comfortably somewhere else. Why go through all this work, all this stress, all this struggle to save a building that was barely standing? And my answer is this: they took 30 years of my life, but they didn't take who I am. I am Luna Whitmore, daughter of Catherine and James Whitmore, heir to a legacy that goes back 5 generations. This estate is my family's history, my connection to the people I loved and lost. Saving it wasn't just about preserving a building. It was about reclaiming my identity, my story, my right to exist in the world. The reporter nodded, clearly moved. What would you say to your cousin Edward if he were here today? Luna smiled, a complicated expression mixing sorrow and satisfaction. I would tell him that he was looking for treasure in all the wrong places. The Whitmore fortune was never hidden in the walls or buried in the ground. It was in the strength of family, in the beauty of this place, in the knowledge that we were part of something larger than ourselves. He destroyed all of that searching for gold that didn't exist, and he died alone and broke because of his greed. I pity him, but I also forgive him, because holding on to anger would only poison my own life, and I've already lost too many years to let bitterness steal more. As the interview concluded and guests began touring the estate, Luna found herself surrounded by well-wishers. People shook her hand, hugged her, told her she was an inspiration. An elderly woman with tears in her eyes told Luna that her own sister had been institutionalized in the 1970s for hysteria and had died there, never getting justice. "Thank you for fighting," the woman said. "Thank you for proving that they were wrong." A young couple asked about booking a room for their anniversary. A historical society representative wanted to discuss getting the estate on the National Register of Historic Places. A documentary filmmaker asked if Luna would be interested in letting them tell her full story, including the dark parts, to raise awareness about psychiatric abuse and wrongful commitment. But the moment that meant the most came near the end of the evening, when an elderly man approached Luna hesitantly. He was in his late 70s, thin and frail, walking with a cane. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice shaky. "I don't know if you remember me. My name is Peter Hendricks. I was your father's law clerk, back in the late 1980s and early 90s. Luna stared at him, memories flooding back. "Peter, of course I remember you. My father thought very highly of you. He said you were one of the brightest young lawyers he'd ever worked with." Peter's eyes filled with tears. "When Edward had you committed, I wanted to fight it. I wanted to testify on your behalf, to tell the court that you were perfectly sane, that Edward was lying. But I was just starting my career, and Edward threatened to destroy me professionally if I interfered. He had connections, money, influence, and I was a coward. I stayed silent." He gripped his cane tightly. "I've regretted it every day since. I've thought about you, wondered if you were all right, hoped somehow that you'd be released, that justice would be done. When I saw the news stories about your escape and your fight to reclaim the estate, I couldn't believe it. I thought I was hallucinating. But here you are, and you've done what I was too afraid to help you do all those years ago." Luna took his hand. "You were young and scared. Edward was a powerful man who had already successfully destroyed my life. I don't blame you for protecting yourself." "But I should have been brave," Peter said, tears now streaming down his face. "I should have stood up for what was right, regardless of the consequences. Your father taught me that the law exists to protect the vulnerable, and I failed to honor that lesson when it mattered most." Luna pulled him into a gentle hug. "You're here now. That counts for something. And if you really want to make amends, I could use a lawyer's advice. Running this inn is complicated. Permits, regulations, liability issues. I have Jennifer and Robert helping, but another experienced attorney wouldn't hurt. Peter pulled back, wiping his eyes. I would be honored. I'll work pro bono, of course. It's the least I can do. As the grand opening wound down and guests began leaving, Luna stood in the garden with Sarah, Tom, Jennifer, Robert, Dr. Morrison, Marcus, and Peter. Her found family, the people who had helped her reclaim her life and her home. To new beginnings, Sarah said, raising a glass of champagne in toast. To justice, Jennifer added. To stubborn old women who refuse to give up, Tom said with a grin, making everyone laugh. To the Whitmore estate, Luna said. May it stand for another 100 years, and may it always be a place of truth, healing, and new starts. They drank, and then Sarah announced that the first official guests would be arriving in 3 days. A retired couple from Pennsylvania who had read about the inn online and wanted to support Luna's efforts. More bookings were already coming in, the website showing steady interest, the calendar filling up with reservations for the coming months. Over the next 2 years, the Whitmore Estate Inn became a success beyond anything Luna had imagined. The 3 bedrooms were consistently booked, often months in advance. Guests came not just for the historical atmosphere, but for Luna herself. They wanted to meet the woman whose story had moved them, to hear her tell it firsthand, to see living proof that injustice could be overcome. Luna discovered she had a natural talent for hospitality. She cooked breakfast for guests each morning, serving homemade biscuits, fresh fruit, eggs from chickens Tom had helped her raise in a restored coop behind the estate. She sat with guests in the library, telling them stories about the estate's history, her family, even carefully edited versions of her time in Willowbrook that focused on her strength rather than her suffering. Reviews on travel websites glowed with praise. Guests described the inn as magical, authentic, a step back in time with all the modern comforts. They posted photographs of their rooms, the gardens, their breakfasts artfully arranged on antique china. They wrote about conversations with Luna, about feeling inspired by her resilience, about leaving the inn with renewed hope for their own struggles. The success allowed Luna to continue restoration. She hired permanent staff. Marcus became the groundskeeper and maintenance manager, his knowledge of the property and genuine affection for Luna making him perfect for the role. A local woman named Patricia took over housekeeping, her attention to detail ensuring that every room was spotless and welcoming. Sarah eventually quit her marketing job to manage the inn full-time, handling bookings, finances, and promotional efforts. Tom continued working on restoration projects, tackling one section of the estate at a time. They restored the greenhouse, turning it into a breakfast room where guests could eat surrounded by plants and morning sunlight. They rebuilt the fountain completely, installing new plumbing and a beautiful bronze statue to replace the one that had been stolen. They cleared the overgrown gardens, bringing back roses, azaleas, and flowering trees that had survived Edward's destruction. The library expanded beyond its original space, with Luna using settlement money from her lawsuit against Willowbrook's parent corporation to purchase rare books and create a reading room that attracted book lovers from across the country. She hosted monthly literary salons, inviting local authors to read from their work, creating a community space that honored her father's love of literature. Luna also used some of the settlement money, which totaled nearly $2 million after years of litigation, to establish a foundation supporting victims of psychiatric abuse and wrongful commitment. The Whitmore Foundation provided legal assistance, advocacy, and resources for people trying to escape or fight against unjust institutionalization. It was named in honor of her parents, and Luna served on its board, using her story to raise awareness and funds. 3 years after the inn's opening, Luna celebrated her 80th birthday with a party that filled the estate's gardens. Over 200 people came, including former guests who had become friends, local officials who had supported her restoration efforts, activists from the psychiatric rights movement, and journalists who had followed her story from the beginning. Sarah and Tom, who had married the previous year in a ceremony on the estate grounds, presented Luna with a gift, a professionally produced photo book documenting the restoration process. It started with photographs of the estate in ruins, the day Luna had first returned, and progressed through years of work, showing the gradual transformation, room by room, garden by garden. The final pages showed the estate as it was now, beautiful, thriving, filled with life. Luna turned the pages slowly, seeing her own journey reflected in the building's transformation. There she was at 73, thin and worn from Willowbrook, standing in the ruined foyer with determination in her eyes. There she was, scrubbing floors, painting walls, planting roses with dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her brow. There she was greeting her first guests, older but stronger, her face showing peace she hadn't known in decades. "I'm not crying," she said, even as tears streamed down her face. "These are just emotional leakage." Everyone laughed, and Sarah hugged her. "You've earned the right to cry, Luna. You've earned the right to feel proud of everything you've accomplished." The party continued into the night, with music and dancing and toasts celebrating Luna's life and legacy. But as the evening wound down, Luna slipped away to the library, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. She sat in her father's restored chair and closed her eyes, and for just a moment, she could feel his hand on her shoulder, hear her mother's laughter from the garden. The estate had ghosts, but they were good ghosts, memories of love and family, reminders of what had been and what had been reclaimed. A knock on the doorframe made her open her eyes. Dr. Morrison stood there smiling gently. "May I join you?" "Of course," Luna said, gesturing to another chair. Dr. Morrison sat, quiet for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about our sessions, about everything you went through. You know what strikes me most? You emerged from 30 years of systematic abuse and gaslighting with your sense of self intact. Most people would have internalized those messages, would have started believing they really were crazy, really were incompetent. But you never did. How?" Luna considered the question carefully. "I think it's because I knew the truth. I knew I wasn't seeing things or hearing voices. I knew Edward lied. And every day in Willowbrook, even when the medication clouded my mind, even when the staff treated me like I was delusional, somewhere deep inside I held on to that knowledge. The truth was my anchor. It kept me from drifting into the madness they insisted I had." She paused. "That and stubbornness. My mother always said I was the most stubborn child she'd ever met. I wouldn't admit I was wrong even when I clearly was. In Willowbrook, that stubbornness served me well. I refused to admit I was crazy because I wasn't. I refused to believe I deserved to be there because I didn't. And I refused to give up hope that someday, somehow, I would get out and reclaim my life." Dr. Morrison nodded. "That stubbornness, that grip on truth, that refusal to internalize their narrative, that's what saved you. And it's probably why you're able to be here now, running this inn, building this new life, instead of being broken by what you endured." "Oh, I was broken," Luna said softly. "I am broken, in some ways. I have nightmares about Willowbrook. Sometimes I wake up thinking I'm still there, that this whole life is a dream I'll wake up from. I startle at loud noises. I can't stand the smell of institutional soap or the sound of keys jangling. I'll carry those scars until I die." She looked around the library, at the books she had saved and replaced, at the familiar space she had recreated. "But broken things can still be beautiful. This estate was broken, torn apart by Edward's greed and neglect. But we put it back together, and it's beautiful again. Different than it was, changed by what happened to it, but beautiful. I'm the same way. I'm not who I would have been if Edward had never betrayed me. I'm scarred, changed, marked by what I survived. But I'm still here. I'm still standing. And I've built something meaningful from the ruins." Dr. Morrison smiled. "That's a profound truth, Luna, and it's one I'm going to share with my patients who are struggling with their own trauma. Broken things can still be beautiful. Scarred people can still build meaningful lives. Thank you for that wisdom." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, until the sound of laughter from the party drew them back to the celebration. Luna rejoined her friends and guests, dancing despite her 80 years, eating cake, accepting hugs and birthday wishes, living fully in the moment she had fought so hard to reach. As the party finally ended near midnight and the last guest departed, Luna stood on the front steps with Sarah, Tom, Marcus, and Patricia, her core team, the people who kept the inn running. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For believing me when no one else did. For helping me save this place. For being my family when my blood family failed me." "You saved yourself, Luna," Sarah said. "We just helped with the details." The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The inn continued to thrive, requiring constant maintenance and occasional major repairs. Old buildings were never truly finished, as Sarah had predicted. Luna developed arthritis in her hands and knees, her body reminding her daily of her age. But she adapted, learning to pace herself, accepting help when needed, focusing on what she could still do, rather than mourning what she couldn't. At 82, Luna published a memoir with the help of a ghostwriter who had stayed at the inn and been moved by her story. The book, titled "The Walls Never Talked: One Woman's Fight Against Wrongful Commitment," became a regional bestseller and brought even more attention to both her story and the Whitmore Foundation's work. Luna donated all her proceeds from the book to the foundation, using her platform to advocate for psychiatric reform and patients' rights. The book's success led to speaking engagements at law schools, medical conferences, and advocacy events. Luna, who had spent 30 years being silenced, now had a voice that reached thousands. She spoke about the dangers of unchecked psychiatric power, about the importance of due process in commitment hearings, about the need for oversight and accountability in mental health facilities. She also spoke about forgiveness, about choosing to build rather than to rage, about the power of stubbornness and hope. "Anger is justified," she would say, "but anger alone doesn't rebuild ruined estates or reclaim stolen lives. You need vision, you need patience, you need help from others, and you need the stubborn refusal to let injustice be the final word in your story." At 85, Luna began training Sarah to fully take over the inn's operations. Her energy was waning, her body giving her clear signals that she needed to slow down. She still lived at the estate, still greeted guests and told stories, but the daily management fell increasingly to Sarah and the staff. "I'm not dying," Luna assured Sarah when they discussed the transition. "At least, not imminently. But I'm old and old people die. I want to make sure the inn will continue after I'm gone, that this place will keep serving its purpose." "It will," Sarah promised. "Tom and I have talked about it. We want to keep the Whitmore Estate Inn running exactly as you've built it, a place of beauty, history, and second chances. And we want to make sure your story is never forgotten, that every guest who stays here learns about Luna Whitmore and what she accomplished." Luna smiled. "Then I can rest easy. This place will outlive me. The truth will outlive me. And maybe that's the best revenge against Edward after all. Not that I won, but that what I built will endure long after both of us are gone." On Luna's 90th birthday, the estate hosted what would be her final large celebration. She was frail now, using a wheelchair for mobility, her voice softer than it had been, her hands shaking from age and illness. But her mind was sharp, and her spirit was undiminished. The party was smaller than previous celebrations, limited to close friends and family. Jennifer and Robert came with their now teenage children. Dr. Morrison attended with her husband, both of them in their 80s themselves now. Marcus, who had become like a son to Luna, brought his new wife and their baby daughter, named Catherine, in honor of Luna's mother. Peter Hendricks had passed away 2 years earlier, but his daughter attended, bringing a letter her father had written to be read on this occasion. In it, he thanked Luna again for her forgiveness, for giving him the chance to make amends, for teaching him that it's never too late to do the right thing. He had left a substantial donation to the Whitmore Foundation in his will, his final act of atonement. As sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Luna asked to be wheeled out to the rose garden, where her mother's plants had finally been fully restored. The roses bloomed in profusion, pink, red, white, yellow. Their scent carried on the evening breeze. Tom had installed a bench with a plaque that read, "Catherine's Garden, restored with love." Luna sat among the roses, surrounded by the people she loved, in the home she had fought so hard to reclaim. She thought about the 72-year-old woman who had escaped from Willowbrook 18 years ago, terrified and alone, with nothing but determination and a stolen coat. She thought about everything that woman had endured and overcome, everything she had built from ruins. "I want to tell you all something," Luna said, her voice quiet but clear in the evening stillness. "I've lived 90 years. 30 of those years were stolen from me. For a long time I was angry about that. 30 years I'll never get back, experiences I'll never have, a life that could have been but wasn't." She paused, looking at each face gathered around her. "But I've come to understand something. Those 30 years taught me things I might never have learned otherwise. They taught me the value of freedom, of truth, of fighting for justice even when the fight seems impossible. They taught me that human kindness can bloom even in the darkest places. Marcus unlocking a door, Dr. Morrison believing my story, all of you helping me rebuild. And the 18 years since I escaped? Those years have been fuller, richer, more meaningful than the 42 years before my commitment. I've built something lasting. I've helped other people escape their own Willowbrooks. I've proved that it's never too late to start over, to reclaim what was stolen, to build beauty from ruins." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "So yes, Edward stole 30 years from me, but I've stolen them back by making every year since count for 3. I've lived, I've loved, I've fought and won, and when I die, which won't be today, despite what my doctors keep predicting, I'll die knowing that I didn't let injustice have the final word. I wrote my own ending, and it's a good one." Luna died peacefully in her sleep 2 years later, at the age of 92, in the master bedroom of the Whitmore estate that she had finally restored. She was surrounded by photographs of her parents, by her mother's jewelry that she had kept, by the book containing her story that had helped so many others. Sarah found her in the morning, and though she grieved, she also felt a profound sense of peace. Luna had lived on her own terms, in her own home, having reclaimed everything that mattered. She had died free, vindicated, surrounded by beauty and love. The funeral was held in the estate's gardens, attended by hundreds. Former guests came to pay their respects. Psychiatric rights advocates honored her legacy. Journalists who had followed her story from the beginning wrote OB,